Welcome back to Microservices in Go. We're building a microservice on Heroku using their Postgres add-on. So in a previous video, we set up the database connection and also our migrations that we run here. So today, we're going to actually start hooking up our APIs, taking in a request, and actually inserting stuff and getting stuff back from our database. So let's jump in. Let's get started. So I am in our api.go. And I'm looking at our handlers, and we're going to go through and implement each of these today. Let's start with the create home. So let's build out our request, and that'll be just create home request. And this will need all of the pieces of a home. So this will need essentially these here. And this will be an agent ID. This will be an int64. So when we create a home, we're not passing in the entire agent object or structure. We're just passing in an ID, and the ID will be agent underscore ID. So this is what the create home request is going to look like. And just to give you an example here, I have this little test request that I just made in the repo, just rec.json. And this is what that request is going to look like when we come in. So just the agent ID, and these will be the rest of the values. And let's build out a response. So create home response. This is kind of optional, but previously we sort of talked about having this maybe success field and maybe an error field as well. So I think that's useful. So we can do that. So success is just a Boolean, and go. We'll do errors, and this is just going to be a string. Okay. And then finally, the home that will return, and we can just return a full db.home. And we'll do that. I spelled success wrong. Nice. Okay, that looks good. So now we have our request body and we have our response. So let's go ahead and get rid of this here. So let's just write some comments for what we're going to do. We want to parse in the request body. So we want to parse in the request body. We need to get the database somehow. And finally, we need to insert our home and then return a response. So these are the things that we need to do. So let's go through one at a time and let's do them. So the first step is parsing in the request body. So just built in, Go has the JSON library here, and we can just use a new decoder, and it takes a io.reader. So if we do r.body, we can basically read in from the body. So we can get whatever text is in our body here, and we can read it in, and we can decode, and we need to specify where we're going to decode to. So let's do request and make sure it's a pointer, it's an address, and create home request. So we're going to decode into request, and that returns an error. So let's handle it. And if our error isn't nil, we're just going to do http.error. Well, let's see here. So we have a nice response, so we can use that. So let's go ahead and we can just encode and return that response. So we'll build the response, set up all the fields. Success is going to be false. And our error, we can set to the actual error that it is. And our home is nil. And let's just encode that. Okay, and this returns an error as well. And here I'm just going to log it just in case. Just in case we failed to send that back to the user. And let's see here. Let's write the status back. So if we can't decode the response, we'll just say that's a bad request. All right. And finally, let's return so that we don't keep processing. Okay, there's that. So we can try this right now here. Let's go ahead and build. Okay, we're up and running. And to test this, I'm going to just change the type. We're expecting an integer, but if I pass in with a string, it should fail. So we do curl, and this is the syntax we can use. The method is post, and to use a file in the current working directory, you can just do -d and at that file. Let's do that, and I'm going to use JQ to kind of print it in this little pretty format here. So we see success false, and we see the error. Cannot marshal string into int. All right, if we change that back to an int, we run it, and we just returned a 200 back. Cool. So let's go ahead and work on getting the database out here. So to do this, we can use context. So G has a lot of middlewares here, and a nice way to pass values down through your requests is using the context so that all of the incoming requests can access things. So if you have like loggers, or maybe you have metrics that you're going to emit like statsd or something like that, you can use the request context to kind of add in key value pairs. So we can do middleware dot with value, and we'll say DB. And now we need to get our database in. We just need to get our database here. So if we do pgdb, we'll alter the structure of our new API. We're going to add this parameter. So we're saying when we build an API, we need to also give it a database. And then we're just going to put that into our context here. So that means we'll need to change main, cmd server main. So right here now, we need to give it a database. So pgdb, and we've built our database right there, and we can just pass it through. Okay. So now all of the incoming requests will have this, this database value in the context. So if we go down here now, we can get the database from context. So let's do that. So we do our context dot value, and then we just pass in the key, and let's cast this to pg.db. So this specifies the type, and then we'll get our database. We'll get our database out of there, and we'll get OK, because we're doing a cast here, and this is going to be a Boolean true or false, whether or not we were able to find and pull this out. So if not OK, we're going to do this same thing. We're going to need to build this response again. And this time our message is just going to be, we couldn't get the database from the context. Okay, so there's that. So now we have our database. So now let's insert our home. So the next step we're going to do here is actually create the row. I'm going to change this to pgdb just so we don't get a naming clash with our db package over here. Okay, so db.create home. That's what we want to do, and we're going to want to pass in pgdb and some kind of object from this create home request. All right, so this function doesn't exist, so let's go ahead and create it. So if we go into db home.db, this will be where we'll keep all of the functions for interacting with our home database model. So let's create the function, create home, and this is going to take a db, which is our Postgres database, and then this will take in a just a home object here, and we'll return a home and an error. And for now, let's just return nil nil. All right, so we had this. So we're using our PG library here, and to insert, we do something like this, db.model, and now we need to pass in the actual model here, so request dot insert. Okay, so that does that. That actually will insert our row. It's going to return a result object and an error object, so let's hold those. And let's see, so result is not really useful to us. If you're doing like a bulk insert or like a bulk update, you can see exactly how many rows that you've worked with, but this model object isn't really useful to us. So I'm actually going to just use underscore and ignore that one. And right here, let's handle the error. So if there was any kind of error, we don't want to return any home. Let's just return the error. Okay. Otherwise, we want to retrieve this whole object. Otherwise, we want to return that. And we also want to return the agent, which has an ID and a name. So to do that, we'll write a query. And let's hop to PG's examples. So I'm just on their GitHub page right here. And if we scroll down right here, so select story and associated author in one query. This is exactly the kind of thing we want to do. We have this relation here, and we're trying to select the story. So we can bring this over. And I'm going to change this to be this address pointer syntax here. Not a big fan of using the new method. That's just a code style. If you'd like to use new, go for it. All right, so our relation here is agent. So whatever the name, remember we set up this relation here, whatever the name of this relation is, this specific name here, you'll need to pass in. So if this is like agent123, for example, we need to put that here, okay? So whatever you call your agent, whatever you call your relation, that's what goes there. And for us, it is our request, sorry, home. So we're reading into this empty home. We're gonna pull in this relation as well, and we need to get home.id equals request.id. Okay, so one other kind of facet for GoPG. So when we do this insertion here, and we pass in that request, it actually updates that request object and it puts the ID that it automatically inserted into that object. So when we pass the request in here, this ID is going to be just totally empty. There's nothing in there yet. But as soon as we ran this insert and there's no error and it succeeds, it's going to write ID for us. So now we have access to that ID. All right, so we're going to query our home, and we're also going to query the relation agent. Okay, so that looks good there. One additional piece that we're going to have to modify too. Let's open up homes and let's look at this briefly. So another facet of GoPG is that when you do an insertion, it looks for these column IDs, specifically these IDs. So when we pass in dbModel request.insert, we need to also have an agent ID field, and that's an int64. That's the type we're using, and it needs this JSON string here that we're setting needs to match this column. That's how it'll do it. So we need to add this in as well. Okay, so that's good. Now we want to return home, and we can also just return error. So we'll handle this. We'll handle if it's a home or an error outside of this function. Okay, so we're set up here. Let's see here. One additional thing that we haven't done yet is just set a foreign key on here. So in Postgres, just to make your database stronger, more robust, and more secure, we can use constraints and keys. So if I do references, agents, ID, This is going to create a foreign key on the agent ID column, and it's going to make sure that every row we try to insert into homes must have a valid agent ID that maps to something in that agent table. So it's going to look up in the agents table, and it's going to check if the ID column in agents matches this. So we can't create any homes with random agent IDs that don't actually exist. All right, so we created the home. Let's go back to API here. So create home takes a database and a request. So let's make that request. And let's fill all fields. So we're not passing an ID, but we are passing in the price, request.price. Remember, we're getting this from the request body here. And request.description, request.address, and we have the agent ID as well. And we don't need agent. Okay, so this returns a home and an error. And let's handle that error. So if error does not equal nil, that's error.error. So we're going to just send back the what went wrong. Okay. Otherwise, everything's good. We're successful here. So we can actually write back this home into the response. So here we'll do res equals create home response, and let's fill all fields. So in this case, it's true. We succeeded, and the home now we can just pass in home. And now we need to write it. New encoder, W, encode, res. All right. Okay, so we're going to send the response, and we just write back a status OK. Okay, so we're all done. This hopefully will work. Let's rebuild this and test this out. All right, so we're up and running. And let's test this out. So everything's good here. And let's go ahead and curl. Send it. Okay. So we get an error back. Awesome. So this is actually looking kind of nice here. So error, insert or update on tail violates table. Homes violates foreign key constraint. Homes agent F key. So remember, we set up this constraint right here that says every agent ID needs to exist in the agent table. But we don't have any records in the agent table, right? So we can actually just insert a row here. So as part of our migrations, we can insert in some default agents. So maybe our little real estate firm here has a couple of agents already in it, and we just want to always create these agents whenever we run our migrations. So let's do that. So we can just do insert into agents and values, and we pass an ID and a name. So let's do 1, dev topics. Okay. And now we'll rerun this, and our migration scripts will automatically create this record. All right, we're running. It's clear. And let's go ahead and post this again. Awesome. So now we get this full response body back. So that succeeded there. So we see success true, errors empty, and we actually have our home now. We have an ID of 1. So that's the ID that Postgres, our database, automatically generated for us. And we see all of our fields. And we also see our agent. So if we pass in any other agent ID, like 33, we see that we fail to create that. And for example, if we create another record here, we should see a different ID. So here you see home now has this ID. It has ID 3 that was successfully created. And one thing I just wanted to point out too, you might be wondering, hey, why is this home ID 3? We just have one other home, right? Yeah, that is just a facet of Postgres and the serial type. So we created the first home, that's ID 1. Then we tried to insert a second home, and that failed because Postgres said this foreign key doesn't exist. But when you use serial, it just increments every time. This is like a way that Postgres handles some concurrency issues. So rather than having to like maybe revert what current ID you are from, I don't know, from 3 back down to 2, it just always increments. So even when you fail to insert, you're always going to increment that serial. There's only 2 rows created. There's not like a ghost second row created. Okay, so let's keep going here.